Today's episode of Explore is a little different. Today we're exploring the past. We're taking a look at South Holston Lake and what lies beneath.
It's the gem of our area. South Holston Lake is one of the most beautiful lakes in the entire Southeast. The lake is cradled in a large bowl created from the massive Holston Range to the southeast and a row of small mountains to the northwest. The mountains to the northwest on this old map were simply called the knobs. But around here, all small mountains are called knobs. This is a mountain. These are knobs. And the knobs to the northwest keep the lake from spilling out into the valley. The deep freshwater lake is a fishing and recreation mecca for the region, and the bass and trout fishing has made this a secret fishing hotspot for Hollywood celebrities and international visitors. South Holston is a deep lake. How deep? The height of the Bristol sign is about 50 feet. If you stacked 5 Bristol signs at the intake of the dam, about 10 feet of the top sign would be sticking out of the water. At the intake, it's about 240 feet deep. The lake is at the headwaters of the TVA system and was completed by the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1950. In just a matter of months, an area that had been settled for more than 100 years was submerged under millions of gallons of water. There were homes, schools, churches, and cemeteries. It all had to be destroyed and removed before the water could fill the area. Anything left that could float to the surface would become a navigational hazard, so by the time the water began to fill the valley, there was little left of the old community. That was in 1950, almost 3/4 of a century ago. The question is, what is left of that old community after all of that time? Alan Linkus is a dive shop owner and has explored the bottom of South Holston Lake for most of his life.
And for years I've had people that's surprised that we're actually even here because we're in the mountains of Tennessee and it's not a likely dive location. The diving South Holston is a seasonal sport. Of course, being in the summer when it's nice and warm, the temperatures in the winter can get down into low 40s and even deeper it gets colder.
Because of the depth of the lake, some sections require special equipment.
As the lake progresses from up in Virginia and crosses into Tennessee, it gets deeper and deeper. By the time you get down here to 421 Bridge, we're looking at 165 feet. When you get out to the spillway over at the dam, we're looking at about 240 feet. Through new technology, mixed gases and stuff, you can actually dive to over 1,000 feet. But in recreational diving, we limit that to 130 feet.
So, after all these years, what is on the bottom of the lake?
It's a man-made lake. They used a quarry out here to build the dam, so there's a lot of big boulders, a lot of big fish. Catfish hunting is a neat little sport for scuba divers to go out and kind of noodle the catfish, so to speak. Over the years, we've put old boats and stuff, cabin cruisers and stuff to go look at. But as far as any of the structures, TVA destroyed those. We found there may be a foundation for a house, a well, and we thought, boy, here's a big hole we're going to get to dive in, but it had filled up with mud and stuff.
Alan is asked more than a person would think about what's on the bottom of that lake.
I get a lot of phone calls from all over wanting to know about the town that's at the bottom of South Holston Lake. A past resident, William Hill, who's an author and has moved to Colorado, had written a book called Dawn of the Vampire. And it's based on the graves were supposed to be moved out before they built the dam. His theory was, what if they actually didn't? Well, we had a drought. The lake dropped down 100 feet. They were out skiing at dusky dark, and one of the skiers hit something, and it was a casket that was floating. And it progresses from there to where we have vampires that live here in Bristol, and they're walking the streets during daylight hours, and then he progresses on to where wolves get involved. And it's a very interesting, fun book to read. William Hill's Dawn of the Vampire.
The middle and south fork of the Holston rivers plowed right through some of the most rugged country in our area. It twisted and turned back on itself, carving deep valleys and canyons until it emptied through Ross Ridge toward Osceola Island and Bluff City. Just before the South Fork took a final turn to escape the steep canyons of Holston Valley, a recreation area lined both sides of the river. Big Creek was a leisure area named after the creek that ran from the base of Holston Mountain to its confluence with the South Fork of the Holston River. In a time when air conditioning was incredibly expensive for homes, during the hot summer months, the river park, under the shade of all those trees, beside the cool waters of the South Fork of the Holston, was a welcome respite from the heat of the city. Big Creek had been established around the turn of the century when streetcars still traversed Bristol's streets, and a spur was completed going from Bristol, beside the river, and through the opening where the dam now sits, and terminating at Big Creek. Much of this spur was created using the older rails that made up Holston Valley Railroad that was built to carry timber out of the valley. Even the streetcar ride winding through the countryside was a welcome treat for the citizens of the area. The area around the gap in Ross Ridge would require the most work in building the reservoir. And since Big Creek Park was directly in the area that would become the basin of the lake, it was the first area to fall victim to the TVA earth movers. Not only were all of the structures and roads taken away, but entire knobs were moved. If we backtrack the route of the river, we see that it crossed the area behind the dam and ran along the base of the knobs in the area that is now Lakeview Boat Dock. Boats sitting at the dock can get depth readings of over 200 feet. This is one of the deepest parts of the lake. When we overlay a U.S. geological map from 1937 on a modern Google Earth three-dimensional map, we can see that the road that goes down the mountain to Lakeview Boat Dock was actually a county road that continued down the steep side of the mountain below the level of the lake, all the way down where it met the riverbed at Rudy Church. The river and the road took a turn to the east, past Pigman Hollow. It connected with this bridge at the base of this knob and continued east to Holston View School, a three-room school that was erected in 1916 for the consolidation of Rudy Branch and Peters View schools. By the time the school was demolished, it had been converted into a one-room schoolhouse. The road went past the school and took a hard left through the ridge and finally emerged somewhere around the area that is now the parking lot for Laurel Marina. That ridge, behind the school, had blocked the route of the South Holston River. This was a big, tall ridge that ran about 1.25 miles out into the lake basin. Considering that the entire valley was carved by erosion caused by the river, this ridge must be solid rock for it to divert the river halfway across the valley to what was called Horseshoe Bend. One of the most famous landmarks on South Holston Lake is Cliff Island, a small strip of rock that is actually the tip of the spine of that ridge. Now, I always wondered how deep the water was there. Well, now I know. The cliff goes almost straight down to the riverbed, 200 feet below the surface of the water. There were some steep canyons in Holston Valley. About 300 yards further along the ridge is the last island in the ridge. It's called Boy Scout Island. In the winter, when the lake level is down, several acres of ground appears, but during the summer months, the only trace of the island are the trees that somehow manage to survive with their roots completely submerged. The roundness of that island hides the fact that just under the water's surface to the north is the same vertical drop to the riverbed as the cliff at Cliff Island. As we travel further up the route of the original riverbed, we pass what had been farms, roads, bridges, and small family graveyards.
Entire communities were moved to make way for South Holston Reservoir, including their cemeteries. Just below the dam is an old cemetery to which many of those grave sites were moved.
And as could be expected, there were several churches in Holston Valley, and those churches not only had to be demolished, but their cemeteries, some of them very old, had to be moved.
I'm standing in a cemetery behind Holston Valley Baptist Church, which is on Cleveland Road in Washington County, Virginia. But actually many of the grave sites here were relocated from the old Holston Valley Baptist Church in Sullivan County, Tennessee, which now resides beneath South Holston Lake.
Up here in this corner, we have 64 graves.
Paul Ketron is the pastor of Holston Valley Baptist Church.
Nobody knows who they are, but each one of them is buried in an individual space. Each Memorial Day, we set a wreath up. And then that way, we can let the community know that everybody is cared for. One of the most remarkable things is when TVA purchased this property, that it was the old Rains farm. And as I was looking over some of the documents, especially the deed, the church had to allow her chickens free range for 1 year. And the church could not bother chickens, and that's very hard for a Baptist to have chickens running around and not being able to do what Baptists do best.
The church, formed in 1872, is that right?
That's right. In 1872, W.N. Buckles was the first pastor. This is a cornerstone that was laid in this church in 1948. And there's some various items in there, and it's a time capsule that is supposed to be opened up 100 years later. The old stained glass windows are the same windows that was brought here from back in 1872 out of the original church. And it's highly possible that the bell that we have in the tower is the same bell that they had back then.
It's now been a lifetime since the area that is now South Holston Lake was a thriving little farm community. In the more shallow regions, up near the river, in the winter when the lake is low, traces of old farmhouses emerge. People sat on the porches of those old houses. They raised their families, grew their food, and grew old in this idyllic land in these steep canyons that is now all but gone. Sometime when you are driving across 421 Bridge, or you are racing across that deep water in your boat, or just standing on the shore looking out, try to remember that those islands and ridges are actually the tops of knobs. And at the base of those knobs were people raising their kids and living their lives.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look into the past and into the depths of South Holston Lake. So do yourself a favor, grab the kids, get the dogs, and get out and enjoy nature in this beautiful area that we call home.